There is a massive misconception in the firearms community regarding budget weapons. Many people assume that cheap guns are rare, sketchy unicorns hiding in back alleys. The reality is far less dramatic. They are usually completely normal, mass-produced firearms that simply lose their value for incredibly boring and practical reasons. Today, we are going to cut through the internet noise and discuss exactly why certain guns become dirt cheap and why that reality tends to scare people who simply do not understand the mechanics of the market. If you want to know whether you are getting a hidden gem or a complete nightmare, stay tuned as we break down 7 of the most notorious budget firearms on the market. Number 1. Hi-Point C9. When someone mentions a dirt cheap 9mm, the Hi-Point C9 is usually the first name that pops up, and it has absolutely earned that reputation. Having handled enough of these, I can confidently state that there is no magic or mystery behind its price tag. Mechanically, it is a straight blowback pistol with a fixed barrel designed around the absolute simplest way to make a 9mm fire consistently for minimal money. Objectively, a blowback system in a 9mm requires mass because the slide itself is doing the heavy lifting that a locked breech would normally handle. That is exactly why the C9 wears that famously huge zinc aluminum alloy slide alongside a very stout recoil spring. The objective upside to this design is that there are fewer moving parts. The barrel does not tilt, which can actually help with practical accuracy at typical defensive distances. However, the subjective downside is that the gun feels incredibly chunky in the hand, and the recoil can feel snappy and abrupt when compared to a modern locked breech compact pistol. Capacity is also very old school, usually relying on an 8-round single-stack magazine, meaning nobody is confusing this heavy brick with a modern high-capacity carry piece. My personal assessment is that most of the talk regarding the Hi-Point being unreliable is simply internet groupthink mixed with bad setups. These guns often run perfectly fine on full powerball ammunition. But some examples do get picky with certain hollow points, especially if the magazine is worn, the feed lips are tweaked, or the gun is run bone dry. You also have to remember that blowback pistols do not tolerate limp wristing, as well as people think so a loose grip can quickly turn a marginal magazine into an absolute jam factory. When folks actually keep the weapon cleaned, lightly lubricated, and use decent magazines, plenty of C9s just keep chugging along. Priced around $150 on the open market, it stays cheap because it is heavy to ship, terribly ugly to resell, and absolutely nobody is flexing one on range day. It is a purely functional tool. Number 2. Mossberg Maverick 88. That same simple, functional, and cost-effective mindset shows up again once we transition into the world of budget pump-action shotguns. The Mossberg Maverick 88 is exactly what happens when a company takes a highly proven pump design and strips it entirely down to the stuff that actually matters. I have always looked at this shotgun as the work truck version of a Mossberg 500, featuring the same general layout and the same pump shotgun logic, just built to hit a price tag that regular working people can actually stomach. From an objective standpoint, you are still getting a real pump shotgun with dual action bars, which means the forend does not bind the way some bargain basement pumps do. The receiver is made of an aluminum alloy just like the 500. The critical lockup happens at the bolt straight into the barrel extension. So you are not relying on the receiver itself to take that explosive beating. Most of these ship with a 5+1 capacity and 12 gauge. And the popular security versions commonly come with an 18.5-inch barrel, though longer magazine options exist depending on the exact setup. Subjectively, it is simple, serviceable, and boring in the absolute best way possible. The cheap nature comes from manufacturing choices you will notice very fast, such as the safety being a crossbolt located behind the trigger instead of the traditional Mossberg Tang safety, alongside very basic finish and furniture. A lot of these are built using a mix of United States assembly and Mexican-made components, which effectively keeps costs down without turning it into a mystery gun. Parts compatibility within the Mossberg ecosystem is decent, but it is not a direct one-to-one swap with every 500 part, especially when you start talking about barrels and magazine tube setups. With a retail price generally hovering around $250, the Maverick makes sense for the exact same reason every cheap gun makes sense. It is common. It is heavily proven. The used market is completely flooded with them. It is arguably the best value in home defense today. Number 3. Rossi RS-22. That theme of a flooded market keeps showing up once we dive into budget .22 caliber rifles like the Rossi RS-22. The RS-22 sits comfortably in that zone, where .22 caliber rifles become so common that the market basically treats them like household appliances. Every single time I walk into a gun shop, there is always some budget semi-automatic rimfire sitting on the rack because the .22 long rifle is the default cartridge for training, plinking, and keeping behind the truck seat for a lot of folks. Mechanically, the RS-22 is a straight blowback system, which is about as simple as engineering gets in rimfire land. Most of these packages ship with an 18-inch barrel and a detachable 10-round magazine. And the whole rifle stays incredibly light because it wears a polymer stock and strictly keeps the metal only where it needs to be. Many of them are set up out of the box with a rail or a scope mounting option because nobody wants to fight tiny iron sights forever, especially when the .22 caliber is all about getting cheap repetitions at the range. The critical part that most people miss in their subjective reviews is ammo sensitivity. Rimfire ignition is inherently less consistent than centerfire. Bulk pack ammunition varies wildly. So the exact same rifle can run perfectly smoothly on one load and get incredibly cranky on another. When my personal rifle starts acting up, the fix is usually very boring. You just need to clean the chamber, scrub the feed area, and check to make sure that the magazine lips are not bent. Weak ejection and failures to feed are very often just the result of heavy carbon and bullet lubrication buildup. Usually priced around $130, the RS-22 stays dirt cheap simply because there are massive amounts of alternatives and tons of used ones floating around out there. Not because it is a disposable piece of junk. Number 4. Heritage Rough Rider. That same simple and old-school energy shows up beautifully when you step over to a single-action .22 revolver, like the Heritage Rough Rider. Single-action .22 revolvers stay cheap because the fundamental design is simple, and the job they are meant to do is incredibly basic. You slow down, line up your sights, press the trigger, and repeat. The Rough Rider lives perfectly right in that lane. Objectively, it feels old-school, on purpose featuring a loading gate on the right side, an ejector rod for kicking empty casings out one by one, and a cylinder that you manually index as you go. There is no speed, no tactical flexing, just pure shooting reps. What makes the Rough Rider an absolute budget king is how it is built. Most of them utilize an aluminum alloy frame paired with a steel barrel and a steel cylinder, which successfully keeps both the weight and the manufacturing cost down. Many models are 6 shots in .22 long rifle. And a lot of the highly popular ones are convertible, coming with an extra .22 Winchester Magnum rimfire cylinder, which is honestly a highly solid value if you actually plan to shoot Magnum loads. Sight setups are usually very basic and fixed, though some specific versions do come with adjustable sights depending on the exact trim level you purchase. The safety setup is also a massive reason why this specific gun gets talked about so much. Plenty of Rough Riders include a manual thumb safety, which is absolutely not normal on classic single-action revolvers. It is placed there specifically because this gun is heavily bought by first-time shooters and casual plinkers who genuinely want an extra layer of safety to prevent doing something dumb. Subjectively, the trigger feel is typically crisp enough for decent slow fire, and practical accuracy is usually much more about your ammunition choice and how clean you keep the cylinder face and forcing cone after a long day at the range. At a price point often under $150, it is a fantastic weekend toy. Number 5. SCCY CPX-2. That whole concept of cheap but usable is going to matter significantly when our list shifts from rimfire fun over to budget everyday carry guns, because that is exactly where manufacturing compromises start getting a lot more personal. Carry gun cheap is where people start acting weird fast. And the SCCY CPX-2 lives firmly right in that bargain corner. This is a compact 9mm built entirely around a hammer-fired double-action-only system. This means that every single trigger press is a long, deliberate pull that both cocks and releases the internal hammer. That specific design keeps the internal mechanics very simple, which in turn keeps the retail price very low. However, subjectively speaking, that trigger feel is usually the very first thing people complain about because it is undeniably long and sits on the heavier side of the spectrum. Mechanically, it is a pretty standard modern setup, featuring a polymer frame, a locked breech, a tilting barrel action, and it feeds from a double-stack magazine that typically holds 10 rounds. Size-wise, it falls perfectly into that subcompact class with a short barrel, meaning it is meant to be carried comfortably much more than it is meant to be loved for hours at the shooting range. Recoil is technically manageable, but because of the short grip and the lightweight polymer frame, it can get a little bit snappy in the hand depending on the specific ammunition you run. I have found that running a decent brass-cased ball ammunition for a proper break-in period tends to smooth out a lot of those early complaints from owners saying their gun hates life. The primary reason it stays dirt cheap, often found for around $200, is simply market reputation and ergonomics. Early production runs had enough valid reports of feeding and extraction issues that the brand caught a permanent side-eye from the community, even though their later production models improved significantly. Add in the fact that the heavy trigger is not everyone's idea of a good time, and the overall finish is very basic. The sights are absolutely nothing fancy, and the secondary resale value essentially stays in the basement. The major subjective upside is that SCCY has long been known for having a very strong warranty, so a lot of budget-conscious owners lean heavily on that safety net when something acts up. Number 6. Ruger EC9S. That whole budget carry pistol lane gets a lot more interesting when the badge stamped on the slide carries real, mainstream weight, which is exactly why the Ruger EC9S ends up surprising so many people. The Ruger EC9S is one of those specific pistols that ends up being cheap because it got aggressively shoved into the shadow of newer, higher-capacity micro-compacts, not because it is some risky off-brand gamble. To me, this pistol has always felt like Ruger took a highly proven slim 9mm layout and simply shaved off costs in the specific spots that do not change whether the gun reliably cycles or not. That is exactly why you will see these priced quite low, especially on the used market, even though the Ruger name on the slide carries real, undeniable weight in the industry. Looking at the objective specifications, you are talking about a single-stack, striker-fired 9mm, built around a traditional locked breech tilting barrel setup, featuring a barrel right around the 3-inch range, and a flush magazine that typically holds 7 rounds. It is very thin, very light, and purpose-built for concealed carry. So the grip is noticeably short, and the gun naturally moves much more in your hands during recoil than a larger, compact double-stack would. The recoil is still very manageable with standard pressure, 115 or 124 grain loads. But the snappiness becomes extremely real if you decide to start pushing hotter +P ammunition through it all day long. Subjectively, the trigger is perfectly serviceable, though certainly not match grade, and the small overall size makes your personal grip consistency matter a great deal. The real budget aspect shows up heavily in the external features. Many EC9S setups ship with very basic sights and standard finishes. And some versions lean on simpler sight cuts compared to their pricier siblings, meaning that swapping sights out can be significantly more annoying than it really should be. The controls are straightforward, and the gun generally likes being kept clean and lightly lubricated because slim carry guns with tight slides are absolutely not allergic to friction. Retailing around $250 to $300, it is an incredibly solid, reliable peace of mind. Number 7. Savage Axis. Once you finally see how a high-quality mainstream carry pistol ends up sitting in the bargain bin purely from market pressure, it becomes very easy to understand why budget bolt-action rifles like the Savage Axis get dumped cheaply in absolutely huge numbers too. The Savage Axis is the quintessential budget bolt gun that just keeps showing up on store sale racks like it actively pays rent to live there. I have seen it most often sold as a package rifle with a basic, factory-mounted scope already attached, which is basically the ultimate big box store recipe for moving a massive ton of units incredibly fast. When a specific rifle exists in such unbelievably huge numbers, and half of them get bought by casual shooters for a single hunting season, the used market gets completely stacked, and secondary prices sink incredibly hard. Mechanically, it is simple and it just works. You are looking at a traditional push-feed bolt featuring dual locking lugs, a 90-degree bolt lift, and Savage's famous barrel nut style of manufacturing that heavily helps keep headspace consistent without making the overall rifle terribly expensive to build. Most standard Axis rifles ship with a lightweight sporter profile barrel and a synthetic stock that honestly feels a bit like a pool noodle if you heavily torque it. But in reality, the action and the barrel are usually the real story anyway. Subjectively, the original Axis triggers were often quite heavy, but the newer Axis 2 variants are well known for using Savage's adjustable AccuTrigger, which is a highly legitimate upgrade if you care at all about clean, crisp brakes. Pure accuracy is exactly why people keep buying them. With decent quality ammunition and a halfway decent rest, plenty of Axis rifles will hold perfectly acceptable hunting groups all day long, and some will shoot far better than they have any right doing for the extremely low money. The included scope in those big box bundle kits is almost always the absolute weakest link in the chain. So, whenever somebody complains to me that their brand new Axis rifle will not shoot straight, I am immediately side-eyeing the cheap glass and the factory mounts first. Sitting around the $300 mark, the Axis is a brilliant example of value. After walking through a cheap pistol, a cheap shotgun, and a cheap rimfire, the Axis really kind of ties this whole list together perfectly. These firearms are common, highly functional, and priced exceptionally low simply because the market is flooded. Not because the guns themselves are cursed. Keep your expectations realistic. Maintain your equipment. And these budget options will serve you incredibly well.